Welcome to the second lecture, where what we're going to do here is this is going to be way less detailed in terms of anatomy than any previous or subsequent lectures. And this is just kind of overview over the geologic time scale and when a bunch of things happened, and we're going to, in the next lecture, be going back and exploring it in much more detail, starting at about the Permian, or a little before actually. So if we take the age of the Earth and we try to compress it inside, say, a 50-minute lecture, a lot of you had Bio 101 that started at 8 in the morning. Well, let's pretend we're back there and say the Earth forms promptly at 8 a.m. What would happen next? Again, we're taking the 4.5 billion year history of the planet and we're compressing it into 50 minutes. You wouldn't see any life until 811. Pretty quick. It doesn't take that long for some life to show up. And this is the first life that we have clear evidence of. If you notice on the clock here, the first tenth or so, it looks, there's a lot going on, kind of exciting. This fire here, that represents the kind of non-stop orbital bombardment that the planet experienced until about 3.5 billion years ago. But we get some life that leaves fossil evidence about 11 minutes past the hour. Things change dramatically at 22 past. The atmosphere has noticeable amounts of oxygen in it. Before then, there was not enough oxygen in the atmosphere to support life as we know it. So we can tell that the atmosphere became very oxygenated because we see iron banding or rusting in rocks laid down about that time. And why do things rust? Well, it's iron plus oxygen. And so the first oxygen in the atmosphere and the oceans happened about that time. And this was formed by, the first life was photosynthetic, and it produced oxygen as a waste byproduct, and this rampant pollution, that's what it was, organic pollution, forever changed the atmosphere of the planet, and you needed to have organisms evolve to take advantage of this oxygen. We don't get complex multicellular life until, almost 45 past the hour. And what do we mean by complex multicellular life? It's not even that complex. We're kind of looking at things like worms, the first worms, and the first metazoans, the first bilaterids. And very quickly after that, we have an explosion of that biodiversity. It takes a really long time to get what you would look at and be able to recognize as, complex animal life. For a long time, it's just single-celled organisms. The Mesozoic, the time of the dinosaurs, pretty famous, Triassic to Cretaceous. Again, if we're looking at this 50-minute block representing the entire history of the planet, it's only 3 minutes long, and so the entire reign of the non-avian dinosaurs over pretty quickly. And at 8:49 and 59.1 seconds, or well within where people are packing up their backpacks to leave a class that ends at 8:50, that's when the human lineage separates from the chimpanzee lineage. So mammals, and especially humans as a whole, we're pretty late arrivers on the planet. Most of Earth's history, we weren't here. That's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this lecture. We go back to the beginning, from Earth's formation to when you first see this complex life. This is called the Precambrian, and it's divided into various eras. Eons. Eras and eons are different. It's divided into various eons. There's the Hadean eon, the Archean eon, and the Proterozoic eon. For our purposes, you can all think of this as the Precambrian. And after the Precambrian, we have the Phanerozoic era. This is eon. So I'm not going to make you guys remember the difference between eon and era because I can't do it. The Phanerozoic eon. And this is where we have complex life that we can definitely see more than single-cell animals in the fossil record. So the Phanerozoic, from 540 million years to present, this is where we have an explosion of life down at the base. You probably have heard about this before, the Cambrian explosion. And things proceed very rapidly after that. The first chordates are around in the Cambrian, the first arthropods. And very rapidly we see, comparatively, it took 4 billion years to get to this point, but once we get here, things go pretty rapidly. And here's a movie to watch that is actually centered on Indiana that shows you the how the continents were changing over this time. Because it's not that the land masses were static and just time kept rolling. The climate changed rapidly in different parts of the planet because the continents were moving. So I would encourage you to pause the lecture now and watch this video. I've said this word a few times, the geologic time scale. What exactly is the geologic time scale? It's a way of referring to periods in Earth's history without always having to say from like 199.6 million years ago to 145.5 million years ago. And just say, oh, the Jurassic. It's these huge time slices that you should have some vague idea of a few of them because they're going to come up over and over again as we go through mammalian history. On the first part of the course where we're looking at kind of proto-mammals, going from basal amniotes to the base of Mammalia, the areas you're going to need are Mississippian, Pennsylvania, which together make the Carboniferous, the Permian, Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous, these three together comprising the Mesozoic. And then once we get into modern mammals, we start talking about like the modern orders like primates, carnivora, artiodactyla. Terms Paleocene, Eocene, Oligocene, Miocene, Pliocene, Pleistocene, and Holocene are going to be really important. For this class, you don't have to memorize all of these dates, but you need to know which came first. You need to know the Permian is before the Paleocene and have a rough idea. If I asked you how old the Permian was and you said 310, I'd be like, close enough. If you said 3, I'd be like, try again. Get vague in there. If I ask you how old is the Triassic, and you can see here it's about 200, 250, and you said, is it like 175 to 320? You're like, well, that's a little bigger than it is. Like, it doesn't go back that old, but, you have a vague idea. You want to know vaguely how old something is. Now, one thing that people get curious about is why the time scale seems to be irregular. We're used to scientific time scales being very, very regular, the metric system. Everything is by 10 by 10, and it's really easy to go up and down it. But you look here, some periods are just about 4 million years, others are 50 million years, others are 90 million years. Why is there the big difference? Well, these time slices of the geologic time scale, everything here was created far, far before we had dating. It's before we had these numbers on here that we just knew, well, these rocks are older than these rocks, but we don't know how old they are. So it wasn't until radiometric dating and, looking at like the magnetic stratigraphy, magstrad, all of that came into bear that we actually started to get some numbers on here. But, the Triassic period was named over 100 years before we had a good date for it. And in fact, if you read some literature, there's a famous paper that I've used quite frequently from 1909 that's talking about Eocene fossil mammals, and he says, he tries to do some math to think about how old the Eocene was, and he says, maybe it's about 3 million years old. Well, he said at least 3 million, and well, he wasn't wrong, but it turns out to be far, far older than that. These times, the actual dates, the absolute dates came more about in the 50s and 60s when we started to understand radioactivity in much better detail and just the Earth's processes in general. So if they weren't based on like numbers, what were they based on? Well, if you look to the left here, you can see all these different fossils shown embedded in the rock. And we have some changeover. Here at the end of the Cretaceous, that's when we lose all the non-avian dinosaurs. That's not a coincidence. The Cretaceous period ends there because that's when we lost all those dinosaurs. What happened is people were looking at the rock record and they were like, hey, the flora and fauna greatly change here, and they greatly change here, and they change just a little bit here, and they change a little bit here, and that's what divided up these periods. Overall, again, what you need to know from the geologic time scale is roughly when these periods are related to each other. Know the Paleozoic comes before the Mesozoic comes before the Cenozoic. Know the Jurassic is part of the Mesozoic, and know roughly how old they are. But you're not going to have to fill out a blank geologic time scale or anything. I want you to know them relative to each other. And when we're going through the fossil history, when I say something went extinct at the end of the Permian, that doesn't mean it was just around until recently. Now what we're going to do now is take our way through kind of the highlights of the Earth's history. Now, if you want to kind of have a pseudo time machine, you can go to the coast of Australia in Sharks Bay. And this is a hypersaline bay. And what you would look out, when you looked out, you would see all these little lumps. What are these? This is where it is, Shark Bay off the western coast of Australia. You would see all these little lumps. What are they? They are representative of what some of the earliest life forms on the planet were. Now, each of these little lumps isn't alive. What is alive, though, is each of these lumps isn't alive. What is alive, and this is what they look like when they're submerged, is on top of them, you have a microbial mat. And this is photosynthetic microbes. And what happens is they collect on the sand and they kind of make a mat. And when they get buried in sediment, they push up through the sediment. They divide and grow up through the sediment to get closer to the light again. And this creates packages of sediment. And then they create these irregularly shaped kind of blobs. These are called stromatolites, these blobby structures. And if you segmented one through it, you would see the bands here. And we have these in the fossil record going back hundreds of millions of years. Stromatolites pretty much all over, and they're a great example of early life. Now, we don't see stromatolites all over the planet today. Why is that? Well, there's a reason that they're only in this hypersaline environment, is that once we had more complex life that could eat these microbial mats, just go through and gobble up all these little microbes, you didn't see them forming these large colonies. It's kind of the same way. Think about how if you played out bacteria in a petri dish, you'll see a nice colony growth. And well, even though you might have got that same bacteria off swabbing a lab bench, it's not going to grow like that on a lab bench because there's other stuff to disrupt it in that environment. But before there was things to eat it, you had these microbial mats all over the warm, shallow seas along the coastlines. And that was life. That was life for about 3 billion years. And then we suddenly lost all these mats in what is called the Cambrian explosion. Right at the base here, and that's why we started to really, in the Phanerozoic eon, things started to really rapidly change. And probably part of it was it had this great food source that had built up for roughly forever to kickstart it. What was around in the Cambrian? Again, this period was from about 540 million years ago to 488. And there are things that are definitely like the ancestors of modern forms, but I want to start by talking about some of these weird ones. This is my personal favorite. This was Opabinia. It had 5 eyes and a weird proboscis with a little claw on the end. This is, of course, a reconstruction. You got Anomalocaris here, which at first they actually thought it was 3 different specimens. They thought it was a weird shrimp, jellyfish, Opabinia set of creatures, and then they discovered it was all one animal, which was a fairly big predator. We had some trilobites around then. These weird little worm-like things called hallucinogenium. And pay attention to this thing up here. We'll come back to it. This is actually the earliest chordate. So really, really quickly, we went from these microbial mats to metazoan biodiversity. And a lot of these things are bizarre. But they thought this may be an early echinoderm, early arthropods, perhaps. We have trilobites, maybe some early coral. This is being an echinoderm. Very quickly, almost all the modern phyla appeared, and some representatives that may be phyla that didn't make it out of the Cambrian. And this is called the Cambrian explosion, how just almost immediately we went from having just very few animals, very few multicellular animals, evidence of sponges, evidence of cnidaria, to, we had arthropods, nematodes, mollusks, annelids, platyhelminthes, brachiopods, echinoderms, and chordates just pretty much immediately show up in the Cambrian. And so chordates, this is one that was in a reconstruction in a previous slide. This is the earliest chordate. We'll talk about this very quickly. This is Pikaia. It's about 530 million years old, and this is a reconstruction of it. It doesn't have any fins, but what it does have is a really strong tail full of muscle, a big feature, chordates have. Think about most animals, like an earthworm, the end of its gut is the end of its body. It's a chordate feature to have a body, a tail that goes on past the terminus of the gut. And people kind of grasp onto this. You can get a glow-in-the-dark Pikaia. There are some comics that don't quite understand how evolution works, but I really like Pikaia flintstoniensis in there, so we'll give it a pass. What about after the Cambrian? Well, with the Ordovician and the Silurian, not much went on that we care about as studying mammals. This time, of course, we're far before any mammals. There was a lot of biodiversity change here. The invertebrate fauna greatly changed. But, as far as chordates are concerned, not that much is going on. We have developed to look more like this. This is a jawless armored fish. It's got a little slit here for the mouth. Notice no fins. We still have a much stronger tail. We have eyes now, but still not anything remotely mammally looking. And that little jawless, finless fish, this is one of these ostracoderms, and they're around from the Ordovician to the end Devonian. We see here this phylogenetic tree showing at the beginning of the Ordovician, we start to see an explosion in these ostracoderms, and they give rise to something called placoderms, which did have fins. So we actually had the development of fins. And so we have placoderms showing up here, these armored fish. They last until the end of the Devonian. And we then, in the Ordovician, and especially in the Silurian and Devonian, we start to see a big diversity in fish. Here, the shark clade, these are sharks right here. They develop. And we have Actinopteryginae, the ray fin fish. They start developing. And so fishy fins start developing. Fishy fish. The Devonian, again, that's when a lot of those fish were there. This is called the Age of Fishes. You can see these big, huge placoderms. This is Dunkleistes. And also, hey, we have some amphibians around as well. So the Devonian is often called the Age of Fish. It was when fish had the most biodiversity in terms of not only number of species, but in also diverse body plans. We don't care about fish anymore than that. We're going to push them off to the side. We care about is what came out of fish, these tetrapods. The tetrapods, of course, went on land, and they went on land after some other things had gone on land. And one of the things that went on land was plants. Plants, what we think of as plants, you look outside and the trees and the grass and everything, they are very much a terrestrial clade. There are aquatic plants, a couple of our professors, such as Dr. Scribello and Dr. Alex, study aquatic plants. Those are secondary aquatic plants. For the most part, plants had their explosion of diversity once they got on land. Pretty easy to see why. If you think about it for a moment, there's no predators to go after them on land when they left. It was this fertile, nutrient-rich landscape, and plants just exploded once they left the sea. And quickly we had forests that looked crazy, didn't look like anything like we have modern forests, such as giant ferns and all these other weird types of plants. But plants were there, so there was something to attract tetrapods. And very soon after plants went on land, insects went on land too. So they went to eat the plants and insects. So the tetrapods leave the ocean partly to go after the insects, and we get the first tetrapods. And this does happen in the Devonian. And so we got, again, the age of the fish. So we can see a lot of fish in the foreground there. But here, look at this. This is what we're interested in. This is a tetrapod. Like, we're like, what's up there? And we can see clear development in the fossil record going from a fin which was only really for swimming to a fin that could partially support weight to not really fins anymore, but feet that had toes, including like 8 toes. Some of the first tetrapods to come out of the water had 8 toes in the front, 7 toes in the back, but they quickly kind of went to the 5, 5 that we still have. We have the primitive number of digits for tetrapods. But this happened in the Devonian, so we're out on land. Now, once we're on land, some things need to be changed. So when you're in the water, you have these lateral line systems that let you detect movement near you. That's why fish can run away so quickly or swim away so quickly without seeing you, as they feel the movement of the water. They have tail fins. They're adapted for hearing in the water. They have internal gills. When you go on land, though, you need limbs with digits, weight-bearing separated girdles, and we can see all these changes happening in these animals such as Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, getting very, very well adapted to moving on land, and hearing on land, and eating on land, and doing everything on land. And the Devonian is actually, if you look here at this map, where we have the geologic map of Indiana. So like here, this blue here, this is the Pennsylvanian, this is the Mississippian, this here, this is the Devonian. So where Westfield campus is, we are on Devonian bedrock, and Silurian bedrock here, I think that is more where Hammond campus is, since you're right up next to the border. But you know, the Silurian and Devonian, so when the bedrock of the campus was laid down, this is when tetrapods started going on land. Now, they didn't go on land where we currently are, though. This was not land in the Devonian, or where I currently am. Don't know where you are. This was not land in the Devonian. It was a warm, shallow reef, so you actually see coral fossils from this area at this time. Sadly, no tetrapods crawling around on land. This is what kind of looked like here when the bedrock was laid down. You know, we had, again, it was a warm, shallow reef. After the Devonian, we have the Carboniferous, which is the name for the combined period of the Mississippian plus the Pennsylvanian. And some textbooks will have them split, some will have them together. And you know, it's not a slide of the Carboniferous if we don't show you the giant arthropods, so your giant dragonfly. We're talking about 6-foot wingspans, giant millipede-type organisms, and also tetrapods. And tetrapods have, I'm going to skip a couple things here because now tetrapods have completely, one clade has completely separated from being aquatic, and these are the amniotes. So remember, amniota is the ones that have the watertight egg. These are diapsids and synapsids. These are, you know, all living reptiles and mammals are amniotes. All tetrapods, except for amphibians, are amniotes. So amphibians are still tied to the water for reproduction. Amniotes got away from that. And this is about as close as we can get to what we think a stem amniote looked like. This is Diadectes. It lived about 300 million years ago. And, you know, this was, again, this is going to be a stem amniote. It's not a reptile, and it's not a synapsid. It's not online either. You can think about this is a close approximation of the common ancestor of reptiles and mammals. And you can see a reconstruction in the lower right. I don't know why they made it blue. People have asked me if there's any evidence for it being blue. I guess they just like blue. That's more of an art piece than a scientific reconstruction, but it's not bad. And you know, if you look at it, it does look, you would say, oh, that looks like a reptile. But remember, mammals are highly, highly derived, and you know, we're missing all those basal synapsids. So I would definitely agree this is grade Reptilia, but it's not a reptile. And there's its skeleton to compare it. Well, now that brings us to, you know, when synapsids do diverge from Reptilia, or there's a few different terms on here. Sauropsida is probably the most correct term to use for what I've just been calling reptiles. But, you know, for our purposes, you can think of it Synapsida diverging away from Diapsida, you know, or from the reptiles. And at the very base of it, we have this paraphyletic, and paraphyletic means that they're not each other's closest relatives. It's not a good clade. It's just a series of taxa progressively getting closer to the base of Mammalia, and they're called pelecosaurs. And one of them here is I'm going to pop it up here, is Ophiuchodon. And this is about 300 million years old. And if you just looked at this, if you saw this walking in the woods, you would probably think it was some sort of weird giant lizard. It's about the size of large cat or so, maybe coyote size. It's hard to draw exact equivalents because of the different posture and the tail and everything. And this definitely looks very what we would consider reptile-like. But again, you know, if we look at this tree, remember the only thing that's alive for the synapsid side is this branch right here, mammals. If we look here at the diapsid side, well, we have turtles around, we have all these archosaurs, we have a lot more of the biodiversity present in the reptilia side than we do in the synapsida side. You know, we have things where the crown groups came around in the late Permian, still extant, where we have to go, you know, into the into the Mesozoic to get mammalia. What we're going to do is kind of think about these pelycosaurs. And we're going to kind of quickly go through today to kind of fast track to mammals, but then we're going to go back and really think about these animals for the next few lectures. If we just blow up tetrapods, and this is a kind of diagram showing biodiversity throughout time, it's a very interesting pattern. So we get, you know, early tetrapods appearing in the Devonian, and they rapidly speciate. And then here we have the base of Amniota, where we have, you know, the reptile branch here and the synapsid branch here. And notice, like, if we were in the late Carboniferous, well, there's a lot of pelycosaurs, and definitely when you get into the Permian, most of tetrapod biodiversity was actually synapsids. And that is kind of really the case even when we get into starting to get in Triassic, and it's not until the in-Permian and the in-Triassic extinctions that the diapsids, and here it is Dinosauria, really take off. And, you know, even today, mammals, you know, the extant synapsids are only about a fifth or so of the tetrapod biota. We've never quite recovered from, you know, what we previously had in diversity. You know, put some stuff on here. So here's, you know, the base of Amniota, this little blue guy. You know, here's modern reptiles. You know, here's the extinct dinosaurs. We have birds, we have turtles. And here, you know, mammals are, here's the modern mammals, and this is all the way when they separated from the rest of amniotes. So if we go to the Permian, what are kind of the Permian and synapsids? And here we have these pelycosaurs, things like Ophiuchodon and Dimetrodon and Edaphosaurus, things that look very, we would call them reptile-like. You know, they don't look like the mammals. Like if you think about the live mammals we had in class, you know, we have the rats and we had the lizard and we have the turtle. If I put one of these on the table, it looks more like those reptiles than it does the mammal, but it's more closely related to the mammals. And, you know, we're going to kind of quickly go forward and, you know, how do we get from that to modern mammals? We got these Thyraxodons, much more mammally looking. We started to get fur. The first fur was these vibrissa on the heads, and we started to have evidence of an external ear. Started to have differentiation of the teeth. And then Permian ends about 250 million years ago. And we had lots of, like if you look at kind of these landscape reconstructions of the Permian, pretty much all the large tetrapods here are synapsids. Then at the end Permian, a big event happened. There was the largest mass extinction we've had in Earth's history, the end Permian extinction, and it went really rapidly. We lost, you know, 95% of species really quickly. Why did this happen? One idea is the Siberian traps. So here's a warm spring day in the Permian. The Siberian traps. Traps is a way to talk about a large series of volcanoes. So if you look in northern Eurasia, in Siberia, there's this large amount of lava that was vomited forth from the earth extremely rapidly. And you know, think about what one volcano can do to the atmosphere, or a forest fire like what's going on the west coast right now of this continent. you release all these gases into the atmosphere and it can change things tremendously. So imagine if you have this much lava coming out super rapidly. It caused this complete collapse of the biodiversity. Here you can see it just dropping like a rock at the end of the Permian, and massive, massive extinctions occurred. And a lot of synapsids went out, and so these are some of the few survivors. We'll talk about these later. These are dicynodonts, but lots and lots of synapsid diversity was lost. So if you look here, if we look at this diagram, if we put a line right here, and here actually I'll draw this line in fairly quick. If we go to the end Permian, we just draw a line out, you can see like there was a lot of extinctions happen there, and we lost some of these basal synapsids. Even the ones that don't quite make it to the end Permian, they might have been affected by this extinction as well. We just don't have a really good fossil record leading up there, but we definitely lost, this clay, this clay. This clay was pretty decimated. This clay was lost. This clay was really hurt and didn't really recover that well. Notice it doesn't last very long into the Triassic. Cynodonts did okay. And that's what mammals came from, these cynodonts. So we had dicynodontia and cynodonts, and that's it on the synapsid line. Over here, we had much more survival of the diapsids. So here, this is what we had that made it, the cynodonts and the dicynodonts. And if we just look at these very briefly, like compare them to those plesiosaurs we were just looking at, they do look far more mammally-like. We're starting to stand a little bit more upright, especially when we look in the dicynodont, except when you move up to the cynodont. Look at that! Look at that. We're standing fairly upright. And look at this. We're starting to make our ribs look different as we go down our thoracolumbar series. If we zoomed into the teeth, they would look a little different. Tails much smaller, much less robust. So we're looking much more mammally-like for the survivors going into the Triassic. So in the Mesozoic, the start of the Triassic, we have these dicynodonts here. And the cynodonts do pretty well. There's even evidence that, they ate. So these are the plant eaters. These are the meat eaters. So you have the dicynodonts for the synapsid plant eaters and the cynodonts for the synapsid meat eaters. And there is evidence that they had fur on the cynodonts. So looking far more what we consider mammally. Other things are around the Triassic, such as this, which is not actually a dinosaur. It's a crocodile. Crocodiles had a lot more morphological disparity than we see today. This was a two-legged crocodile. There were crocodiles that looked like modern crocodiles as well. And what else was going on in the Triassic? We did have some dinosaurs, but the most of dinosaur diversity really took off in the Jurassic, more so than the Triassic. Maybe that's why it's Jurassic Park and not Triassic Park. There were very few dinosaurs in the Triassic. It wasn't until the extinction at the end of the Triassic that took out a large number of cynodonts and took out a large number of crocodiles as well that dinosaurs really rose to prominence. The dinosaurs in the Triassic, this is one. This is a Coelophysis, which lived in what is now the southwestern United States. Very primitive, but this is what a lot of dinosaurs came from. This is a theropod, so you can think this is the ancestor of things like T-Rex and even modern birds. Once we get to the Jurassic and Cretaceous, this is really the age of dinosaurs. There are some little mammally things here as well. Other stuff that we have appearing, flowering plants show up. Bees really become very important to the ecosystem. Crocodiles are still around, don't count them out, and they were huge. There was actually evidence of these large theropods may have been attacked by these super large crocodiles. And there are mammals, including like the first placental mammal, the first eutherian mammal, was around in the Cretaceous. So things that anybody would see and would think maybe it looked weird, but everybody would agree it was a mammal. So we've come a long way, and the next series of lectures is really going to trace how we come from those very reptilian-looking forms to mammalian grade. What are the Mesozoic mammals? I'll give you a little preview. We have this smear on a rock, which is reconstructed to look much cuter. This is Eomaya. And this is what a lot of people kind of think of as Mesozoic mammals, really kind of shrew-like forms. But there's been a lot of work showing there's a lot of diversity of Mesozoic mammals. So we do have kind of these like shrew-like generalist forms. We also had things like Volantanotherium that was gliding mammals. We have Castorocata, which was a aquatic mammal in the Jurassic. We had a lot going. Digging mammals, like even this Rapinomammus is kind of a mammal that ate dinosaurs. So there was a lot of diversity of mammals in Mesozoic. They were just fairly small. We didn't have any of the really like large herbivores, the really large predators, you know, kind of restricted niches because there were those large dinosaurs around. And you know, here, this one on the far left, this is Morganucodon. Here's a reconstruction of it, and a lot of people kind of consider it one of the first mammally mammals. If you've ever gone to the Smithsonian, they have a sculpture of Morganucodon and call it the mother of all mammals, and it's about the size of a little bit smaller than the rats we had in class. We're going to become very familiar with a tree like this, so we can see, you know, the mammal and tree. So here is Mesozoic. So we have Triassic, Jurassic, and so we can see Morganucodonts here at the bottom. This is where some people kind of put the base of Mammaliomorpha, saying like, okay, we'll kind of put the first mammal term right here. And here's the living monotrams. You can see there's this whole host of diversity between monotrams and metatherians and eutherians. So this is one reason that I told people don't really look at the platypus in the first lab, because it's going to have a lot of really primitive characteristics that'll kind of confuse your observations. And we can see, you know, we have metatherians and eutherians around at least in the Cretaceous, if not a little bit sooner. At the end of the Cretaceous, something happened that a lot of people are familiar with, which was a great big asteroid hit the planet, and there's a crater in the Yucatan Peninsula where this hit, and this caused a bunch of amazing, dramatic paleoart to be created, but you know, more so, it did cause the extinction of a lot of large reptiles. You know, the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct, a lot of the aquatic reptiles went extinct, and the flying reptiles went extinct. The non-avian flying reptiles like pterosaurs went extinct. What immediately happened wasn't very fun. There were tidal waves, there was global cooling, there was acid rain, and hey, remember those Siberian traps? Okay, they're gone. You don't have to worry about them anymore. Oh, we have Deccan traps now. We had massive amount of lava come out in what is now India, and this lava flow was going before the asteroid impact, but it took off once the asteroid did impact, and it's thought that, you know, the impact over here in the Yucatan Peninsula, you know, did affect the mantle underlying the planet, and it kick-started this volcanism. So the asteroid impact on its own probably would have caused a lot of extinction events, but we got this huge global mass extinction because it also influenced these lava flows. But hey, let's look at the bright side. This set the stage for the Cenozoic, which is the modern time slice. You know, we are still in the Cenozoic. It started about 65, 66 million years ago, and this is considered the age of mammals. So this is, you know, from the Paleogene. This is actually supposed to be from the Eocene, one of the earliest time slices in the Cenozoic. And I love this type of paleo art because can you imagine if you walked in the forest on campus and suddenly you saw all these different types of animals in one clearing? This would never happen. But it does show you like how quickly mammals radiated. We have squirrel-like mammals. We have lemur-type mammals. We have things that kind of look like rhinos. We have, this is Uintatherium. Nobody knows what this is. We have things that are kind of like wolves. We have primitive horses. We have, oh, alligators and turtles are still around. They're here forever. We have primitive cats, primitive dogs. You know, we have all of this diversity popping up really, really quickly. And so if we look here at the different orders of mammals, you know, they do kind of explode out in the Paleocene. And this kind of tree is a little outdated. It's not so many dotted lines. We know how things go. But what I did want to show you here was to show you how, you know, when these orders appear. They do appear like in the Cretaceous or in the Paleocene. Another explosive radiation. And, you know, it used to be kind of this evolutionary bush of placental mammals. We're like, well, we don't really know how anything was shaken out. But modern systematic techniques, especially molecular systematic techniques, have really refined this. And, you know, what we're going to do later on in the course is really going to look at how, not only, you know, how we got from a reptile type amniote to mammals, we're going to look at even kind of weird modern mammals. So look at these and, what are these? What is these possibly related to? These are reconstructions of how we got to whales. We're going to look at whale evolution. This started happening in the Eocene. Look at the ages here. So even whales were, mammals went into the ocean and filled in these niches that were previously filled by aquatic reptiles. And then we get to the Neogene, which is from 23 to 2.5 million years ago, and things look much more like the modern biota. Everybody say, oh, here's horses, here's some weird skinny lions, here's some weird skinny hippos. These are actually rhinos, not hippos, but we have giant hell pigs, entilodons. We have camels. We have these weird things called colicotheres, which look like somebody crossed a horse and a gorilla. They're closely related to horses. And we have a much more open landscape as well, because that's a big thing. In the Paleogene, a lot of what is now North America was heavily forested, including places like Wyoming, like Montana, like what is the Great Plains, or even the Badlands. They were heavily forested, and we started to get these plains to open up later on in the Cenozoic to give us really the modern fauna. That's not to say that everything, once we reach the Neogene, is totally modern and is around today. For example, the Neogene starts here, 23 million. We go forward and we'll hit this group, Desmostylia, which is completely extinct. It was really weird. Desmostylians were not very well known aquatic mammals that may have been closely related to elephants. We're not really sure. So don't think that, if you make it in the Neogene, that clay is going to make it forever and there's nothing that's different from what's around today. There's still a lot of fossil diversity. What about from those 2.5 million years ago now? This is the Ice Age, and we're still in an Ice Age. We're in an ice house event. That is any time that there is ice on the planet, permanent ice caps, that is considered an ice house. We're in an interglacial period, which means that there are less glaciers, but what we commonly, popular speech refers to as the Ice Age is a glacial period, and that's when the glaciers extended down, and carved out what are now the Great Lakes. We just had tons of ice where we were, and you have these huge glaciers everywhere in the northern hemisphere and coming down in the Andes and coming down Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayas and all that, and much more temperate areas in other parts of the world. And also because so much water was in these ice caps, we had much, much lower sea levels. Like, look how fat Florida is there, and we had the land bridge that you could walk from Asia right down into North America. If we look at the mammals in the when it was a glacial period, a lot of extinct ones you're familiar with, probably like woolly mammoth, and we have horses. We have them things that are still around, like muskox again, and make it closer to home. It was the receding glaciers that started to recede about 10,000 or so years ago. That kind of, maybe a little sooner than that. A little bit, before that, but that's what kind of scooped out the Great Lakes. They were formed by all the melting ice melting from the receding glaciers, and that gave us our Great Lakes. If we look at modern mammalian diversity, where are the hotbeds of diversity? It's like most diversity maps, we see along the equator, in the tropical jungles, that's where we have the most diversity by numbers. But of course, there's mammals all over the planet. Mammals are found on every continent except Antarctica. Only penguins get on the land here. We have, they go around the edges, but deep inside Antarctica, that's going to be penguins. Any seals or anything down here, there's going to be on the ice floes on the edges. So mammals are, all over the planet. But the most diversity is in the tropical jungles of South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. And if we just kind of look at this diagram, again, a little review, the overall pattern we have of tetrapod evolution is, we have well, amphibians aren't on here, but amniote evolution. is we have the reptiles here, the mammals here. And so this diagram here, you can see we have the pelycosaurs give rise to the therapsids, give rise to primitive mammals, give rise to modern mammals. We'll put some things on here. So, we came from these labradont amphibians, and then we had our little blue guy, our basal amniote, and we had, we started to have the pelycosaurs come off from there, and, we have the cynodonts, and you give rise to primitive morganeugodonts and get away to modern mammals. And so the next few lectures are really going to go this in intricate detail. We're going to look at pelycosaurs. We're going to go through all of this, and we're going to slowly say, okay, what order did we attain characteristics to have our mammally mammal compared to our basal amniote? And that's where we're going to go from here.